Friends, I am grateful to be here on these sacred lands and grateful to be in this sacred circle with you. It's difficult to find a text as poignant as the pinnacle words of this passage from the book of Ruth. Believe it or not, my brain runs this small poem in the King James Version. Whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God. A text about fierce fidelity, so memorable, so beautiful, that it's often wrenched out of context for a straight wedding. Given its true foundation is a multi-generational battle of the wills between two women, it's more than a little ironic. I've always loved the opening of Marge Piercy's poem on Ruth, the one that Susie read. It gives words so precisely to my own experience of the book. The eloquent devotion of that famous poem can draw you in to sentimentalize the whole book. The rarity of these two named female protagonists, three really with Orpah, can cause you to imagine a story, even a world where women are centered, but yet neither is true. The book's a text of gritty realism, a whole book of women compromised, making do with the lesser of two evils in order to survive in a man's world. Yes, the women wiggle and wobble just to live. And yet there's something important about this text, about Ruth, important to the gospel writer Matthew, who asserts her place in the lineage of Jesus, important to us perhaps, who too exist in realism, who are also compromised and make do. Important too because it reveals something about God and who we're called to be and about who we can be to each other. Now, the backdrop of this story is the natural disaster of famine, but also the unnatural disaster of women's treatment as property rather than person. The contrasts are sharply drawn. Bethlehem, the house of bread, is now without food. This means starvation. And a woman without a man, husband, son, brother, well, you are nothing. Nothing economically, nothing religiously, nothing socially, nothing. And yet, in Israel's covenant, in Torah regulations, there is a safety net, some legal provision for the dignity and material needs of those who the world calls nothing: widows, foreigners, the poor. What does that safety net look like in these ancient times? It's the practice of gleaning. The poor are enabled to gather up the remnant in the field so they can eat. And there's land redemption, helping a disadvantaged relative who's losing their property to debt to reclaim it. These practices are also the backdrop to the story. Now, the famine turns Elimelech and Naomi into economic migrants, forced into foreign lands to survive. And they go to live in a place that, from the perspective of Israel, is the definition of the wrong side of the tracks. And yet they settle, and the sons marry Moabite women. Disaster strikes again, and all the men die. There's a lot of hyperbole here. One son is called Mahlon, translated sickness, and another Kilian, translated end of the line. And it is the end of the line for Naomi when her husband and then later her sons die. So desperate, she begins to return to her people where at least those Torah regulations should be in place. And that's where we get to this famous poem. What's important here is that Naomi doesn't want them to come. She wishes them well and sends them back to their own kin over and over. She keeps saying, I got nothing for you anymore. I have no sons to give you. I can't protect you. And yet, for reasons that are obscured, Ruth is determined to go with her. It's not a sentimental ode. It's the words of a power struggle. Something like, don't make me leave you, you old biddy. I'm sticking like glue. Just get over yourself. I am going with you if it kills you. And while that happens, I'll be buried with you too. And Naomi gives up and gives in. Very literally, she gives up speaking to Ruth. It's always seemed to me like it would be a very long journey back to Bethlehem in stony silence. Let's note Ruth's claim on God. Is she devoted to Yahweh, your God will be my God? A Yahweh she would barely comprehend, so foreign this religion would be to her? Or is she devoted to Naomi and Yahweh comes along for the ride? It's fascinating that the unfolding story doesn't worry about it. Love of God and love of another bound together. We know God through each other. That's okay here. And Orpah's choice, that also seems okay. The story follows Ruth, the ancestor. But for Orpah, there's no recrimination. She just goes back to her kin, the right choice for her. Ruth and Naomi return to Bethlehem, not to sunshine and roses, but to gathering up the scraps and to getting Ruth a nice man so they can both survive. We don't get to read on, but just to whet your appetite, Naomi offers Ruth up to her relative in a disconcerting and overly directive way, and Ruth does what she's told. They have to survive. So you do what you have to do. Boaz, Ruth's future husband, takes her in this kind of awkward property deal, but protecting her from the worst. And the text is embarrassed about sex, and so are many of the commentators. Everyone in the story is ordinary. Everyone in the story is compromised, and yet our characters push past, go above and beyond with a view to the survival of the others. Ruth is more faithful than she needs to be. Boaz is more generous than he needs to be. Naomi is more persistent towards Ruth's welfare than she needs to be. And in the end, a baby, Ruth and Boaz's baby, is much more to chosen grandma Naomi than he needs to be. The word that rings out and through this text is a word that most translators struggle with. It's a little bit like kindness, but stronger, a little like fidelity, but softer, a little like generosity, but less abstract. So some translators try combination: good faith, loyal kindness, covenant love. Some say steadfastness. What's super important about it is this: it's a characteristic of God. It's the quality of that fierce, generous, covenantal love of Yahweh for God's people. And it's a characteristic that the people, we, are expected to emulate. Here's its most famous placement in another text that's super familiar to us, Micah 6:8. What does Yahweh require of you but to do justice, love hesed, there's that word, and walk humbly with your God? Somewhat uncomfortably to us justice types, there are these two other pieces: humility, now there's a struggle, and this hesed thing, this loving kindness thing. Justice alone, righteousness alone is not the whole call. There's a discipline here of practicing good faith, loving kindness to one another. Now, it's Naomi who says it first in the text that we read. When Ruth and Orpah first want to come with her, she urges the women to turn back, and she said, "May Yahweh do hesed, good faith, with you, just as you have done with me." What a statement. She basically says Yahweh would do well to emulate the kind of loyal kindness that they have demonstrated to her. And who are they? Foreign young women, unbelieving women. She can see her God's loving kindness in them. I wonder what unlikely places and unlikely people we see this characteristic of the divine in. Naomi sees hesed in them, and then it keeps spilling all over in the story. Ruth's fidelity to Naomi is hesed. Boaz's generosity is hesed. Ruth's willingness to unite with a lonely Boaz is hesed. These compromised folks doing their best in a bleak and tragic world. These people going over and above, coming together across difference, amid tragedy, doing good faith with one another. Well, they have God stuff. Wildly ordinary, imperfect folks reveal hesed. They show the very stuff of God: loving kindness, good faith, steadfast love. As I said, the book of Ruth ends with a wriggly baby. Obed in the arms of Naomi, a grandmother, more of choice than blood, the empty one from whom all was taken, the one who felt abandoned, is filled up, is gifted, arms full, with a child who restores her spirit, gifted by the loving kindness of Ruth, connected to another baby who 10 generations later is a gift to restore the world. 2,500 years after this story was written, women still wiggle and wobble to live. And with different levels of privilege and resilience, we face the tragedies of famine, displacement, bereavement, poverty, pandemic, and so much more. Even as we seek to be principled, even as we advocate for justice, the complexities of life and our humanness can make us compromised. Nobody's got it all right. Nobody's pure. And that's humbling. The discipline or invitation of Hesed is there for us. Acts of mutual regard, gestures of loving kindness, extensions of good faith. These simple graces can help open up a future. Some of you shared an article by a hardcore campaigner, long-term justice guy, Gideon Foreman, entitled, "Why We Should Put Friendship at the Heart of Canada's Climate Movement." It made me smile. A secular take on the revelation that with justice and humility, loving kindness is also required. There's something very important about Ruth and Naomi. The great Alan Davis says they are immensely vulnerable, both of them. And yet they are fierce protectors, both of them. In mutuality, they strive to protect each other, treating each other with a depth of kindness. She suggests that this might image for us how one vulnerable person might treat another who is likewise vulnerable, or how one people or one nation that is troubled or frightened or terrorized might risk recognizing kinship with another beleaguered people. Solidarity, loving kindness, maybe. That idea opened up a lot of windows in my mind and heart. I love this story, expressly because Ruth and Naomi, well, they're just so human, humbly so, ordinarily so, beautifully so, loving kindishly so. And that is precisely what makes them image the divine. At the season of first fruits, we recall two travelers, co-conspirators, scavengers, making do with leftovers and mill ends, whose friendship was stronger than fear, stronger than hunger, who walked together the road of shards, hands joined. Amen.